My name's Gerald Webb. Um, I'm born and raised in South Haven. Left in my 20s to pursue job opportunities, which gave me the opportunity to come back in 2009. I came back principally because I wanted to raise my son. In terms of my background, I worked in the nuclear services industry most of my career, and then later got to work with a private equity group who I still work with, and also own and operate several different businesses privately in addition to that. And in my spare time, I help my wife operate Beach Walk Properties, which is a vacation rental management company. 2014, my wife founded Beach Walk Properties. Um, that really came out of her passion for hosting guests in the community. But that interested her to start Beach Walk Properties and start managing vacation rental homes for other people that may not have had the time or necessarily the skills where she could help and kind of expand that a little bit. So she started that in 2014. Since then, it's grown to manage 45 different properties. She focuses more on lakeshore properties, more of a luxury portfolio, and now employs 8 full-time people, 3 people part-time, and dozens of cleaning staff. Well, certainly there's supporters of short-term rentals and there's opponents of short-term rentals. I think the supporters of short-term rentals see the economic benefit. They see the improvements of the homes in the community. They see, the guests coming now on a year-round basis, which in the past it was just a summer destination. South Haven is now really a year-round destination. There's homes that Beach Walk manages that have guests in them every weekend of the year. They recognize tourism as a significant industry and a big part of the South Haven community, and short-term rentals are a big part of that tourism component. From the opponents of the short-term rental side, I think their largest concern is around too much concentration in both tourism and short-term rentals, and what impacts that may have on the community and its economic health. And in some respects, I think they're right. It's important to be diverse in every way. If either one of us went to a financial advisor and says, "Give us advice on how to invest our money," they would tell you to be diverse.
Yeah.
Apple stock, man, great, but you don't put everything into Apple stock. And as a community, we shouldn't put everything into tourism or everything into something else. So I think it's important to recognize that tourism and short-term rentals are an important part of the community, important part of the economy, and at the same time, we should be looking for diversification into new employers, small manufacturing, and those things. But we don't want to damage this and not have something else. There's a belief that if short-term rentals weren't in our community, that somehow magically young families would just come in here and start occupying these homes, which, I just don't understand that thought process at all, particularly when I think it's completely reasonable to assume that if those homes weren't occupied by short-term rentals, second homeowners would come and absorb those homes and occupy those. And in my opinion, that doesn't bring as much economic value to the community. I think second homeowners are welcome and we appreciate them as well, but it's a different economic benefit in that way. The dream would be to have the young families come. I think we have to create a desire in the community. It's not just about housing, it's not just about price, it's not just about availability. People have to want to come to live here. And we have to, as a community, have to create that draw, and then those things will naturally occur. And if the demand for housing and so forth is there, then we should create the supply. So I dismiss this theory that we're going to make these homes available and they're just going to magically show up. It's that's a false conception in my opinion. The other one that bothers me a bit is this. There's been a little bit of talk that there's no economic benefit from short-term rentals, and from what we get to see in guest behavior firsthand, I mean, from the jobs that we create and the revenue that comes from managing the short-term rentals. As an example, Beach Walk in 2022 will pay over $1 million in wages to the community. So to me, that alone is significant. Only managing 45 properties. And then, as we talk to guests, they're asking about restaurant reservations, shops, where can they rent bikes, where can they rent jet skis, so to say that there's no spend, other than just renting the house from these guests is crazy. And I'm just talking about the direct impact. That's before the guest goes to the shop, to the restaurant, to Myers. That's before the short-term rental homeowner that we manage for hires the landscaper and the construction guy and the maintenance guy and the pool guy. There's a great deal of components to their spend and support. So the conflation of STRs and a housing problem, I think, is false, because they're disconnected in that, mostly in their proximity to the water. Now, to be fair to the whole thing, certainly anytime you add a demand component, it is going to have a factor. But I think those are manageable factors, and I don't think that as a result of that, we should try to devalue property or scare that source of demand away. Again, we should address it with supply. And in doing that, there's still challenges in terms of, inflationary factors obviously are going to drive up housing costs further. Hopefully wages keep up with those, but as of recent, they've been greater than the wages. So those challenges are going to continue to be around. But I do think they're addressable. Again, not addressable on the lakeshore. So in terms of proximity and density, as I mentioned, I just don't, the lakeshore short-term rentals aren't displacing people from acquiring that housing. That's not workforce or entry-level housing. Never has been, never will be. Could it displace a second homeowner that wants to buy that home? Perhaps. Economically, I still, in terms of economic benefit, I still favor short-term rental in that way. I think we welcome second homeowners as well. They bring benefit to the community as well. So in terms of concentration and density, that's a tricky subject. I appreciate the fact that one might want that kind of spread out more and avoiding concentrations in certain areas. It's a difficult task, I think, to achieve. Anytime you start saying yes and no to certain homes, you create this disparity in the value of those, and I think that has a fairness component to future and existing homeowners. I do like the structure now where there's a cap and a ratio. And by the way, a lot of people don't know that there's a cap. I think that's some of the misconceptions, going back to the other question. There is indeed a cap, and it's related to the number of homes. And by using that approach, you have this fluidness to it, so that tomorrow, if I want to sell my home, it's not prohibited from being a short-term rental. If it were, it would decrease the value. Or the other way around, if I had a short-term rental availability and another homeowner didn't, I have more value and I'm getting a win out of that. So The fairness component, I think, is in the way it's structured is really good. Both sides are kind of yelling at the city government and the city officials, for what they want, but they're not talking together in any way in a solutions oriented fashion. It's just, I want this and I want this and you give it to me. And it's, I feel a little bad for the city officials in that respect because they get caught in the middle. They're trying to, satisfy everybody the best they can and do what's right for the community. So I would love to see those sides, if you can call it that, working together a little bit more. It makes sense to form a bit, we'll call it a committee for lack of a better description, where those stakeholders are together. Maybe a chairman that's a little bit more neutral than one side or the other that can kind of organize that and get those concerns out on the table and start brainstorming about ways to solve them. Now, reality says we're not going to solve all the problems. Reality says we're not going to have young families and houses in the shoreline like we talked about. Reality says we're still going to have housing challenges like every other community has. Solutions can be formed and the stakeholders can execute those. And through that, and what the city's already done with the Good Neighbor Guide that you mentioned, and through, smart people being in one room, you can create an expanded best practices that can be published out to short-term rental homeowners, management firms, and everybody can support each other in watching and making sure those are executed and happen. We could share through some messaging that, hey, visitors of all kinds, day trippers, short-term rentals, whatever your reason is for visiting South Haven, we're glad you're here. We welcome you. We want you to be here. But at the same time, we want you to show respect for our community. We want you to, do these things while you're here. We want you to leave it better than you found it. We want you to remember that we live here. We have to get up for work in the morning. We're not on vacation. I'm hoping that people can get a mindset that, it is any industry in any community, there's some level of sacrifice and tolerance for each other and other things. And I really would like to see the community have a little more tolerance for what I think is our principal industry. Again, not to say that should be our only industry, and it shouldn't consume other opportunities. So that is the diversity that we need to strike. And I think people, if they get their mindset there, then it doesn't frustrate them so much when it happens.
Yeah.
And in terms of the neighbors, and everybody has their perspective on what a neighbor is or what a good neighbor is. And personally, having a different neighbor a couple times, several times throughout the year, to me is not necessarily a negative. I enjoy meeting new people, and some of them have become friends, and they come back every year, and that's enjoyable too. Avoid you having a bad neighbor that you're stuck with. So, that perception of neighbors is a little bit different. I think there's ways to embrace, new families, multi-generation families coming and being a house or two away from you, and embracing that a little bit as a good opportunity to meet new people. Because we do have those traditional neighbors, if you want to call them that are full-time, that you might see at church or otherwise. They're there too. But again, I think that's, we got to have a little bit of tolerance for all this, a little bit of patience, and we need to, again, be minded to look for diversity in our jobs and our industries, and find those opportunities and explore them as well, and create a community where people want to come and stay and come and live, because that's part of the component to getting full-time residents. And it comes from having recreational activities, having good schools, having good employers, a whole bunch of components, in addition to having the housing component. So I hope that happens.